Sometimes I feel like you guys are setting me up. I already have the reputation for being the critic who doesn't like to like things, even though I've given plenty of positive reviews too. I love Simon Pegg, Edgar Wright is one of my favorite filmmakers of all time, and then you go and ask me to review the one film in the Cornetto trilogy that I didn't like much. This is a film that was requested back when I was taking requests, but if it hadn't been requested, I would have reviewed this one anyway. I just wouldn't have done it first. I would have started with the other two, or maybe done this one second, because I love the Cornetto trilogy, and I would have hated to start with a film that I didn't like as much. I suppose it isn't really that much of a setup, as this film is often cited as being the best in the trilogy. In fact, I've never met a fan of the Cornetto trilogy that didn't name this as their favorite of the three, so maybe it was just naturally assumed that I would really like this one, but sadly, I did not. In fact, not only did I find this one to be overly long, a little half-baked, and slightly dull, but it wasn't really that funny to me either. In fact, for all of Hot Fuzz's 121 minutes of runtime, I only seriously laughed 3 times in the entire film. Here was laugh number 1.
Janine, I've been transferred. I'm moving away for a while.
I'm not Janine.
Janine, I've been transferred. I'm moving away for a while.
Here was laugh number 2.
And who might you be?
Mr. Staker. Yeah, Mr. Peter Ian Staker.
P.I. Staker.
Yeah.
Right. Piss taker. Come on!
Yes, Mr. Staker.
Here was laugh number 3, and this one actually has 2 parts to it. The first part is when Nicholas Angel is fighting the big guy.
Hey, Biggin. Playtime's over.
Then, much later in the film, he defeats him again and says this.
How's Lurch? He's in the freezer. Just say cool off. No, I didn't say anything, actually. It's a shame. There was a bit earlier on that you missed when I distracted him with the cuddly monkey, and then I said, playtime's over, and I hit him with the peace lily.
Those 3 things were hilarious to me, but the rest of the film was barely a comedy at all. It was basically just showcasing a lot of the tropes from films like this. In fact, I personally feel that the idea of this film is funnier than the film itself. The very title of Hot Fuzz was a reference to how empty and meaningless action cop titles are. What does Hot Fuzz mean? I don't know, what does Point Break mean? What does Lethal Weapon mean? That's pretty hilarious, but what I found funniest was the cover for this film. If you look at the cover for Shaun of the Dead, it's the entire cast surrounded by zombies, denoting the premise of the movie. For The World's End, it's the principal cast posing, denoting everyone's function in the film. What is the cover for Hot Fuzz? It's the 2 main characters and a big fucking explosion in the background. Now that is funny as hell. My problem is that both of those things are actually funnier than most of what goes on in the film. Hot Fuzz begins with Nicholas Angel, an overachieving cop who makes all of his peers in London look bad, so they ship him off to the small town of Sanford. Angel is a great cop, but he doesn't know how to relax or be anything else, a fact that cost him his relationship before he left. Almost immediately after he arrives in Sanford, he disrupts their quiet routine by going right to work and removing all of the underage drinkers from a bar and arresting every delinquent he comes across. It was amusing to see this sleepy little town having a bomb like Angel dropped on it, but the best part of the whole thing was Angel himself, and this is something that I am truly happy to praise about the film. Nicholas Angel is the best character Simon Pegg has ever played. It's one of the best characters I've ever seen, and by far the best acting job that Pegg, who is a fine actor and has played some very good roles anyway, has ever played. I forgot it was him after a while. He truly becomes this character. Unfortunately, I didn't like anyone else in the film, particularly his kooky sidekick. Danny Butterman is mistaken quite naturally for a befuddled drunk, but later turns out to be Angel's new partner. And unfortunately, I can't stand this character. At all. Edgar Wright's films usually have a responsible character opposite a man-child, but this is taking that idea way too far. If I just went by the way he behaves, I would naturally assume that Danny has some kind of mental deficiency, where he has the body of a 30-something but the mind of a 5-year-old. I don't mean he's a man-child like Ed or a man-child like Gary King. I mean it's like he's literally channeling a 5-year-old, which for me is just weird. And annoying. Danny wants to be a great cop like all the cops he loves in his cop movies, and he sees greatness in Angel, so obviously he gravitates toward him. The first big half of the film follows these two around as Angel tries to acclimate to the strange new town and get used to the small-timey work of being a cop in a sleepy village, chasing down shoplifters, hunting escaped swans, and the like. This is where the film lost me as well, because this goes on for so long that it was difficult to hold my interest, and after the first half hour or so, I actually started getting a little impatient. Shaun of the Dead and The World's End both benefited from the fact that they both had very clear end goals. In the case of Shaun of the Dead, it was survive the zombie apocalypse. In the case of The World's End, it was make it to the world's end. Hot Fuzz didn't really have that. It's a big city cop adapting to life in a smaller town, and things escalate from there, which was perfectly amusing for about 10 minutes or so, but then I had to take time out and ask where they were actually going with all of this. And even when you figure out where it's going, it's actually kind of a letdown. There begins a mystery plot where citizens keep dying in a string of bizarre accidents, and no one believes that there is foul play involved except Angel. Good in theory, but this is repeated over and over and over again. Death, it was murder, no it wasn't, you're crazy, lather, rinse, repeat. And that, for me, is what is so disappointing. It's customary in a Peg Wright film to keep all the mundane stuff in the former half and all the weird stuff in the latter half, but the stuff in the latter half was pretty mundane too. There's nothing particularly surprising about it, it's just people in robes killing people for a very strange reason. That's not to say that I think all of their films have to have a supernatural, extra-worldly element, but this is the biggest problem with Hot Fuzz for me. Wright's films usually center around unlikely characters being thrown into a bizarre situation, but Angel is the likeliest person in the world to deal with this kind of thing. I see Sean and Ed throwing records at zombies, or Gary and Andy running away from a mob of robots that aren't robots, and I think, wow, what a strange turn of events for these unlikely characters. But when I see Nicholas Angel running after a perpetrator in disguise, I think, yeah, that makes sense. Good job. Carry on, I guess. If they had made both Danny and Angel underachieving cops who don't really know what they're doing, then I could understand this. But you can't have a larger-than-life character taking on slightly larger-than-life situations. It's just not that interesting, or that funny. Angel isn't out of place enough to make his character's experience interesting or amusing. At least, not very interesting or amusing. And then as if to tack on the opposite problem, they make everything going on around him not make sense at all, in any needed context. For as mundane as the actual premise is when you get down to it, the strangest thing about the film is all the mental cases that surround Nicholas, but this was weirdness for weirdness' sake. The only way in which any of this is weird is that there is nothing to account for the weirdness, which I found took me out of the film more than it sucked me in. It made sense that things were weird in Shaun of the Dead because there was a fucking zombie apocalypse around everyone. It made sense that things were weird in The World's End. There was a freaking alien invasion. This town is weird just because it's a town full of nutcases, and that makes everything in Hot Fuzz ring false instead of funny. The message of this film seems to be that being good at your job is great, but that you shouldn't let that overshadow the rest of your life, which would have been fine if that ever paid off, but it doesn't. Angel leaves Janine for his job in the beginning and never gets back to her, so the only people that he can now appreciate in his life are the new people, and he seems to be appreciating them just fine the whole time anyway.
You just gotta learn to switch off that big old melon of yours.
That's the whole problem, Danny. I don't think I know how.
What the hell are you talking about? You're doing it right now. You went to bars with Danny, you laughed with Danny. So, where is the payoff here? This would be like if in the middle of The World's End, Gary gave up beer and wanted to skip one of the pubs, then later he says, "Gee guys, I just don't know if I can be responsible." It just doesn't ring true. In fact, lots of things don't pay off in this. In the beginning, the film goes out of its way to alert us to a strange symbol being spray-painted on a particular piece of architecture, but then the film forgets about it and it never comes up again. Edgar Wright later went on to explain that this was connected to a storyline that he later cut, but then why show us this in the first place? It's almost like this film wants so desperately to have a mystery plot that it's never that concerned with what the mystery actually is. And maybe that's exactly what the movie is making fun of, but that's only funny in principle. In practice, it runs the risk of becoming the very thing it's parodying and just being a mess. Sometimes a bloated screenplay can come off as an underwritten one because you have so much you're trying to shove in that it just doesn't connect. And this screenplay is simply uneven and unfocused. I like the fact that they're doing something different, but I would have liked it even more if they had done something different that turned out to be something I actually liked, but this one just didn't do it for me. To top it all off, you have the big action climax in the end. Now, I will admit that I derived a certain amount of satisfaction watching Angel just ride into town and shoot up the place after all the crap and bullshit that these people put him through, but for fuck's sake does this get old after a while. You know what made the action scenes in the other two films work? They were short, and they were spaced out evenly throughout the film. This is over a half hour of nothing but shooting and explosions. Now, obviously, I understand that this is satirizing the unnecessarily long and violent aspects of films like these. But once again, it does such a good job at that it actually becomes the thing it's parodying. Once again, the idea behind this is better than actually watching it. It's like that Purple Monkey dishwasher thing I did a while back. You understand the point I'm trying to make, and maybe it's funny, although probably not, but you don't actually want to watch it. And I'm sorry to say that for exactly the same reason, I rarely find myself actually wanting to watch this film. Hot Fuzz, in my opinion, is the least funny and least creative of Wright's films to date. This is one of those films where if it wasn't made by one of my favorite filmmakers or part of the trilogy that I love, I would never watch or think about it again. But you know what? I'm glad I don't like this film. And I know that sounds a little strange, but my not liking this is actually a sign that Edgar Wright and his entire team are doing something very, very right. These people never make the same film twice. The Cornetto trilogy has a lot of connecting themes and running gags, but each film is different. And while this one didn't work for me, it's a reflection that everything they do is an attempt at making a different kind of movie. And naturally, everyone is going to have their most and least favorites of the three. There is a lot of originality and creativity that goes into these films, and while this one kind of failed for me, it at least failed in an attempt to do something new. I would much rather see that than see a tired sequel made only for the sake of capitalizing on past success, so take this review for what it is. I didn't like this one that much for the reasons stated above, but it wasn't for a lack of effort on their part. It's just not for me.